Superman's weak disguise. One of the most famous plot holes people love to joke about is how Superman somehow hides his identity by putting on glasses and calling himself Clark Kent. Like, how does no one notice? Same face, same voice, same everything. It sounds ridiculous on the surface, but DC has actually tried to explain it multiple times, and some of those explanations are way deeper than you'd expect. In one comic, DC introduced the idea that Clark's glasses aren't just normal glasses. They are made from Kryptonian material and can subtly affect how people perceive him. Basically, they help create a subconscious distortion, making others see exactly what Clark Kent wants them to see. A harmless, awkward reporter, not the most powerful being on Earth. It's almost like a low-level hypnosis effect. And while that explanation isn't always used consistently, it shows that DC is aware of the issue and has tried to give it a more sci-fi twist instead of just ignoring it. But honestly, the more grounded explanation might be the best one. Clark doesn't just look different, he acts different. He slouches, he wears baggy clothes, changes his posture, speaks more nervously, and carries himself like someone you'd never take seriously. Some versions even suggest he can slightly adjust his physical appearance, like his height or muscle tension, to sell the disguise even more. So when you combine the physical changes, the personality shift, and a bit of comic book logic, suddenly the weak disguise isn't as weak as it seems. Batman was originally blonde. Most people picture Batman as this dark, brooding figure. You've got the black suit, the shadowy cape, the intimidating presence, but the original version, it looked nothing like that. When Bob Kane first came up with Batman, the design was honestly kind of wild. He imagined him wearing a bright, red outfit with stiff bat-like wings instead of a cape. And yeah, he even had blonde hair. No cowl covering his head, just a regular guy with a mask and a very un-Batman look. It actually looked closer to something like Robin than the Dark Knight we know today. Luckily, this is where Bill Finger stepped in and basically saved the character. Finger suggested almost everything that defines Batman now. The dark color scheme, the cape instead of wings, the pointed-eared cowl, the gloves, and the overall, more mysterious, intimidating vibe. He took Kane's rough idea and turned it into something iconic. Without those changes, Batman might have ended up looking like just another colorful Golden Age hero instead of the legend he became. What's even crazier is that Bill Finger didn't get proper credit for all of this until decades later, officially being recognized as a co-creator in 2014. So yeah, Batman being blonde was almost the reality, but thanks to Finger's vision, we got the version that actually worked. Stan Lee worked for DC Comics. When you hear Stan Lee, you instantly think Marvel, so the idea that he actually worked with DC Comics feels off. But in the early 2000s, that's exactly what happened. After stepping away from Marvel, Stan Lee teamed up with DC to create a series called Just Imagine, where he was given full creative freedom to reinvent their biggest heroes. The whole concept was simple. What would DC characters look like if Stan Lee had created them himself? Instead of sticking to the classic versions of Superman, Batman, and Wonder Woman, he completely reimagined them from the ground up. His Superman, for example, was inspired more by the earliest version created by Jerry Siegel and Joe Shuster, a version that didn't even fly. Stan Lee always said that flight didn't feel scientifically logical, so he leaned into a more grounded take. And in true Stan Lee fashion, he even gave characters new alliterated names, like changing Bruce Wayne into Wayne Williams. So across 13 issues, he reworked characters like Green Lantern, Aquaman, Catwoman, and even the Justice League, injecting them with the classic Marvel-style storytelling, more human, more flawed, and more character-driven. It's one of the rare times in comic history where you get to see the DNA of Marvel applied directly to DC's biggest icons. And it's kind of surreal seeing the man who built Marvel step into his rival's world and basically say, "Let me show you how I do it." Booster Gold went back to the night Joker shot Batgirl around 100 times and could never stop it, no matter what he tried. This is one of those surprisingly emotional DC facts that people don't expect from a character like Booster Gold. Most fans see him as a funny, kinda selfish, time-traveling hero. But there's a storyline where things get way more serious. Booster actually goes back in time again and again, trying to stop one of the most infamous moments in DC history, when the Joker shoots Barbara Gordon, aka Batgirl, in The Killing Joke, and he fails every single time. No matter what he changes, no matter how early he intervenes, events always find a way to correct themselves. Sometimes he gets there too late. Sometimes something else goes wrong. Sometimes the outcome just shifts slightly. But the tragedy still happens. It's basically DC saying that certain events are fixed points in time. time. Moments that can't be undone no matter how powerful or determined you are. But it completely flips Booster Gold's entire character. The guy who usually jokes around is suddenly stuck reliving the same nightmare over and over, knowing he should be able to fix it, but can't. It adds a layer of tragedy, not just to Barbara's story, but to Booster himself. Because in a universe where time travel exists, you think anything is possible. But this storyline proves that some moments are just too important, too defining, and they are meant to happen no matter what. DC almost lost its best heroes to Marvel. This might be one of the craziest what-if moments in comic history, because at one point, DC Comics was actually struggling enough to consider selling off its biggest heroes. Back in the 1980s, while Marvel Comics was dominating the market, DC wasn't doing nearly as well financially. According to former Marvel editor-in-chief Jim Shooter, there was a real discussion about Marvel potentially acquiring characters like Superman, Batman, Wonder Woman, and even Green Lantern. And yeah, that sounds completely unreal now. What makes this even wilder is that Marvel actually considered it. Shooter said he even started putting together a publishing plan for how Marvel could relaunch and handle these characters better than DC. Some people at Marvel were excited about the idea, and it wasn't just talk. But eventually, the deal never happened, and not because it wasn't tempting. Marvel was dealing with legal issues at the time, including antitrust concerns, and the idea of absorbing their biggest competitor would have made things even worse. So they backed off, and DC kept its characters. Looking back, that one decision basically preserved the entire identity of both companies, because if it had gone through, the comic book world as we know it today would be completely unrecognizable. The rape of Wonder Woman. After massive storylines like the death of Superman and Batman's Nightfall, DC was clearly in a phase where they were pushing darker, more shocking ideas for their biggest heroes. So naturally, attention turned to the final member of the Trinity, and that's Wonder Woman. At one point, a very controversial pitch came up from Mark Millar, and yeah, it was as bad as it sounds. The proposal involved putting Wonder Woman through an extremely dark and disturbing storyline that relied purely on shock value rather than meaningful storytelling. From what's been discussed over the years, the idea was actually developed to a certain extent. There were multiple pages of script written and even some early artwork produced. But once people at DC really looked at what was being proposed, it quickly became clear that this crossed a line, not just in terms of tone, but in how it treated one of their most important and symbolic characters. Wonder Woman represents strength, compassion, and empowerment, and the pitch completely ignored that. The project was scrapped before it ever saw the light of day, and honestly, that decision probably saved DC from one of the biggest controversies in comic history. It's a good example of how the dark, for the sake of the dark era of comics, sometimes went too far, and how even within the industry, there are limits. Power Girl's chest was made bigger and bigger by the artist out of curiosity of when the editorial would complain. Power Girl has always been known for her very distinctive costume design, especially the famous window on her chest. But over time, fans noticed something. Her proportions kept getting more exaggerated with each issue, and it wasn't random. It was actually intentional. One of the artists working on her comics, Wally Wood, reportedly started increasing her bust size little by little in every issue. Not for story reasons, not for character development, just out of curiosity. He wanted to see how far he could push it before someone in DC editorial stepped in and said, okay, that's enough. So with each new drawing, he suddenly made a change, basically turning it into a quiet experiment behind the scenes. And the funniest part, it took a while before anyone actually said anything. By the time it was noticed, the change had already become part of how the character was perceived. Today, it's one of those infamous comic book trivia facts that perfectly shows how chaotic and unfiltered parts of the industry used to be. It's weird, a little ridiculous, but also kind of hilarious, because it means one of DC's most recognizable character traits started as an artist just testing the limits. The writers of Superman literally had no idea what to do with the character, so they decided to kill him. By the early 90s, the writers working on Superman were kind of stuck. They had been telling stories with the character for decades, and at that point, they felt like they were running out of fresh, exciting ideas. Superman was so powerful, so iconic, that it became hard to create stakes that really felt meaningful. So during a brainstorming session, one of the writers jokingly threw out the idea, what if we just kill him? The room actually paused and started thinking about it seriously. The idea kept growing, and suddenly it wasn't a joke anymore. It was a full storyline. That's how we got the death of Superman, where he faces Doomsday in a fight that ends with both of them dead. It was huge, like massive. News outlets covered it, people who had never read comics before were buying the issue, and it became one of the most famous moments in comic history. And what's funny is that it all came from a moment of creative frustration. The writers weren't trying to make history, they were just trying to figure out what to do next. But that one offhand idea ended up redefining Superman for a whole generation and proved that even the most untouchable hero could fall. It also showed something important. Sometimes the biggest stories don't come from careful planning, they come from someone just saying something wild. Clark Kent exists in the Marvel Universe. This one feels like a glitch in the multiverse, but it's actually real. Clark Kent has appeared inside the Marvel Comics universe just without being Superman. Instead of the last son of Krypton, he shows up exactly how you'd expect on the surface. A mild-mannered reporter, usually spotted covering events where superheroes are causing chaos. It's one of those fun little Easter eggs Marvel likes to sneak in, where they acknowledge DC characters without officially crossing over. One of his earliest cameos goes all the way back in the 1970s, where fans spotted him alongside Lois Lane at a party scene in an X-Men comic. And it didn't stop there. Over the years, Clark Kent kept popping up in the background of major Marvel moments. He'd show up at press conferences, public events, or just casually walking into scenes where heroes were gathered. There are even moments where he interacts with characters like Thor, almost recognizing something off about him, or casually blending into environments like it's just another day on the job. And what makes this so fun is that Marvel never fully commits. They never say this is Superman, but they make it very obvious who it is. It's like a wink to the audience, a little crossover without actually breaking any rules. It shows how even rival companies can playfully acknowledge each other. And honestly, the idea of Clark Kent just existing in Marvel as a normal journalist, watching all the chaos unfold, is kind of perfect. No powers, no cape, just a guy with a notebook trying to keep up with gods and mutants. Jim Lee only did the entire run of Batman Hush because of a bet. Jim Lee is one of the greatest artists in comic book history, but he also had a bit of a reputation for not finishing long runs. He'd start something amazing, then move on before it fully wrapped up, which became kind of a running joke in the industry. So when Batman Hush was being planned, there was this added layer of pressure around him actually sticking with it from beginning to end. According to the story that's been shared over the years, another artist basically challenged him, saying he couldn't complete a full run without dropping off midway. Whether it was a serious bet or just friendly competition, it clearly lit a fire under him. And this time, he delivered consistently. Issue after issue, Jim Lee stayed on the book, bringing that insanely detailed cinematic art style that made Hush feel like a blockbuster comic event. In the end, he proved everyone wrong. He completed the entire run, and Hush went on to become one of the most iconic Batman stories ever. It's kind of funny when you think about it. One of DC's biggest modern classics might have been fueled, at least partly, by someone saying, "You won't finish this." And Jim Lee basically said, "Watch me." The Joker was once the Iranian ambassador to the United Nations. This sounds like something out of parody, but it actually happened. In a Death in the Family storyline, the Joker somehow becomes the official Iranian ambassador to the United Nations. And yes, it was played completely straight. He was appointed by Ruhollah Khomeini, which instantly gave him diplomatic immunity. That meant even Batman couldn't just walk in and arrest him, no matter how many crimes he committed. Joker basically weaponized politics to become untouchable. And of course, being the Joker, he didn't just want that title, he had a plan. During the UN assembly, he prepared to poison everyone in the room, turning one of the most important global institutions into the stage for his next act of chaos. In the end, heroes like Superman and Batman step in and stop the attack, but the whole situation still feels surreal. Even when Joker's escape goes wrong and his helicopter crashes into the ocean, his body is never found, because of course it isn't. Supergirl was part of the Red Lantern Corps. Most people see Supergirl as just a lighter, more hopeful version of Superman, but her story has actually gone to some very dark places. Unlike Clark, Kara didn't grow up on Earth, she remembers losing everything, and that trauma follows her everywhere. So even though she's a hero, there's always been this layer of anger, confusion, and frustration under the surface that makes her way more unstable emotionally compared to Superman. And at one point, that anger became so intense that it attracted the Red Lantern Corps. Basically, the most rage-fueled group in the entire DC universe. These people are powered by pure hatred. Kara actually became a Red Lantern, gaining one of the rings and fully embracing that rage. For a while, she wasn't the hopeful Supergirl anymore. She was violent, aggressive, and completely consumed by emotion, which is a huge shift from how most people see her character. But unlike most Red Lanterns, who are basically stuck in that state forever, Supergirl managed to break free on her own. Snowflame gets his powers by snorting cocaine. Snowflame is an actual DC villain whose entire gimmick is that he gets his powers from cocaine. Not metaphorically, not hinted at, but literally. The more he uses it, the stronger, faster, and more unstoppable he becomes. DC really created a character who treats drugs like a superpower source. He first appeared in the 1980s during a storyline involving the New Guardians, and he was portrayed as this over-the-top, chaotic villain who proudly declares himself the god of cocaine. Every time he powers up, it's because he's actively using it, and the comics don't exactly try to hide what's going on. It's one of those moments where you can clearly feel the era it was written in. Comics were experimenting, pushing boundaries, and sometimes just going completely off the rails. Looking back, Snowflame has become more of a meme than a serious villain, but that's exactly why people love bringing him up. He represents that weird phase in comic history where writers would just throw wild ideas at the wall and see what stuck. And honestly, in a universe full of gods, aliens, and multiversal threats, a guy powered by cocaine somehow still manages to stand out as one of the most absurd. Wonder Woman and Green Lantern. At one point, there were actual plans to pair up Wonder Woman with Green Lantern, specifically Hal Jordan, and yeah, it sounds random because it kind of was. While Wonder Woman has had connections with characters like Superman or even Batman in different versions, pairing up with Green Lantern wasn't something fans ever really expected. The idea dates back to the 1970s when DC was experimenting with different character dynamics and relationships. A storyline was reportedly being drafted to explore a romance between the two Justice League members. But here's where it gets even stranger. The whole thing got scrapped because a fan had already written in suggesting the exact same pairing, and due to legal concerns at the time, DC didn't want to risk using an idea that could be claimed by a reader. So instead of pushing forward, they just dropped the entire concept. Hal Jordan's story later took a dark turn when he became Parallax, and it's kind of wild to imagine how a relationship with Wonder Woman might have changed that trajectory. Would she have grounded him, stopped him, or would it have made things even more complicated? We'll never really know. Black Manta was the first comic book character to kill a child. Black Manta, the longtime enemy of Aquaman, is often remembered for one horrifying moment. He killed Aquaman's infant son. And yeah, for its time, this was absolutely shocking. Comics weren't really going that far yet, especially when it came to something as extreme as a child being murdered. The story takes place in the 1970s. When Black Manta kidnaps Aquaman's baby, he gave him an impossible choice. Aquaman tries to outsmart him, but it doesn't work, and in the end, Black Manta follows through on his threat. It wasn't off-screen, it wasn't softened, this was a full-on tragedy that hit way harder than anything readers were used to at the time. This moment pushed comics into a darker, more serious territory. It showed that consequences in these stories could be real and permanent, and that even heroes couldn't always win. While it may not literally be the first time something like this ever happened in comics, it's definitely one of the earliest and most impactful examples, and it's the reason Black Manta is still seen as one of DC's most brutal villains to this day.